introduce Dave. So Chris is going to share his screen, and then Dave, if you want to go ahead and start talking.
Thanks, Lisa. Actually, I am listed as the presenter. My job is to introduce the concept here. It's really Christy Teal and Chris Loisel who will be doing the meat and potatoes of this. It's one of those superintendent type of tasks. I volunteered our district to present because I thought we might have a topic that would be of interest to other districts. So what I'll do is give you a little bit of background and some history, and then again, the bulk of the real information that you want about district quality assurance teams will be presented by Christy, who's the executive director for our Success and Link Learning, and Chris Loisel. This will be a little bit clunky because I ended up having to be out of my office at a personal medical appointment, having forgotten about the appointment. So I'm trying to manage two commitments at once here. So Chris has been kind enough to operate the presentation. So I may have to say to him periodically to advance the slide. Bear with us, we've not rehearsed this. So what have we learned about remote learning during COVID-19? I think there's a number of things we've learned about. We know there's a lot of teacher anxiety. We know that there's a variety of different skill sets and experiences that teachers have brought into remote learning and have gained through remote learning. We know that parents have anxiety and they really lack knowledge or experience with remote learning or virtual learning for the most part. We know there's lots of challenges around student engagement, and Chris and Christy did a nice job of talking about some of that in their previous presentation. We know there's challenges to access. It's not equitable. Not all students have access to digital devices, and those that do don't have necessarily access always to internet, and even when they have internet access, they may not have access to adequate bandwidth that's really necessary for effective instruction to take place in remote learning environments. So there's many challenges with access. We also know that reliability, accountability, and monitoring, there's been a lot of challenges with that. We have results that we expect from remote learning. Teachers have expectations of students. Administrations have expectations of the instructional piece. And boards of education have expectations from the administration about the effective implementation of remote learning. So if you would change to the next slide, please, Chris. When we talk about innovation and change, we're all districts in the co-op that are pretty adept at that. I think there's really an important component that we forget, and that's some of what drives the innovation and change. Sometimes it's forced on us and sometimes it's voluntary. Depending on which it is, that can determine what type of evaluation or assessment processes that we use. And sometimes we don't even remember to put in assessment or evaluation processes. We just implement the change and run with it. Sometimes it's driven by competition. Sometimes people are just, leaders are intrinsically motivated and have a tendency to lead in ways that are innovative and that represent change. Sometimes it's environmental. Sometimes it's our situations, or it's regulatory. It's driven regulatory or through the legislative process. The changes that we experienced due to COVID-19 were really environmental and then regulatory, because we were required to present or develop things like continuity of learning plans, and now a return to school roadmap and a COVID-19 preparedness and response plan. These are all regulatory guidances that we have to comply with. Next slide, please. So what types of monitoring systems should we be considering when we're looking at innovating and making changes? Just a few steps to consider as you're thinking about monitoring systems. First, determine what your desired outcomes, goals, or results are. What is it that you want to accomplish with the innovation or the change? We can no longer change just for the sake of changing. Determine what data you're going to measure and how you're going to monitor that data. Included in that will be collection systems, frequency of monitoring, and frequency of collecting and analyzing data. I think often we can be really adept and really good at collecting data, and not always using the data effectively. So you need systems to make sure that you're doing all of those things. One of the things that Berrien Springs Public Schools has developed through its virtual programming, currently operated primarily through our Link Learning program and our Success Academy program, is that we've established a specific group to monitor, collect, and analyze that data, and that's the quality assurance team. We actually created a quality assurance team as part of our continuity of learning plan for our general education program back in March and submitted that in April. And we learned about the importance of having a quality assurance team because of our virtual work through Link Learning and Success. And so we created a team on our on-campus program who was collecting data on a weekly basis. Primarily, it focused around student engagement. It focused around communication between teachers and students, teachers and parents, and a number of other benchmark pieces that we created. And we learned all of that from the work we've been doing for a number of years with our QAT, which has been part of Link Learning and our Success programs. Next slide, please. So couple of the things that Christy and Chris will talk about is what's the role of a quality assurance team, and what's the significance or importance of monitoring systems? Why is that important when we're looking at any change or innovation that we're doing in our schools? What's the real need for quality assurance teams? From my perspective as a superintendent, without quality assurance processes or a quality assurance team, there's no systems for assessing the effectiveness of the change. There's no assurance of the results and a process of analyzing results, collecting the data and using that data or preparing that data in ways that can be used for decision making. And then, what should the general responsibilities of a quality assurance team be? So at this point, I'm going to turn over, I believe, this presentation to Christy and Chris, and they're going to talk to you a little bit more in depth about the quality assurance team and the process that we use at Berrien Springs. So Christy, I'm turning this over to you and Chris.
Wonderful, thank you, Dave. So the who we are and what we do, if you were a part of our last presentation, this particular slide looked a little different, but was in there also. And it's really critical from a quality assurance team standpoint and perspective that not only do you know your why, your mission and your vision, but also that your staff understand those things. Because if you know these things, then you know exactly what you need to track, how you need to track it, and what you need to share out. It's critical that your staff understand this, because as you are sharing data from your dashboards, they really need to understand why it was important that we had to pay attention to that. And then also why it is important, with some of the decisions that we made, but also to get feedback from them as we are sharing information. If they can always go back to why they exist and how they're going to service kids, then we can make and gain a collective commitment in how we want to operate. Before we go on to the next slide, I do want to mention kind of how our quality assurance team got started. This started actually about 4 years ago, but it really wasn't with a team. It actually was with one person that had a passion for school improvement and looking at data. And that one person for about 2.5 years, maybe 2 years, really tracked all kinds of things, such as your achievement data, looking at the system to look at the logs with communications, to look at interventions, to look at things by center and by staff. And also, way back when, there were only 10 centers. So it was a little more doable for one person to do it, but it still wasn't quite where we needed to be. And so then 2 years ago, we moved to a 3-person team, but we were a little bit part-time at it. And that person was Chris, myself, and Jackie Geip was added to that. What was beautiful about that is now we had a collective group of people that could look at different pieces and then come back and have a conversation and be very flexible and provide good feedback on what are the trends, what are some opportunities, and start to give that guidance on what are some things that we need to change. And then this year, we are now full-time, and we have added actually a 4th person. So I will turn it over to Chris now to talk about what we look like now.
So always keeping the mission of the school in mind, the quality assurance team developed their own mission. And basically their mission is to continuously improve the experience of the student throughout the student's organizational life cycle. That starts with pre-enrollment. So what messages are you sending through your marketing campaigns and things like that, that connect that student, that make them feel comfortable about coming to you. How you handle the enrollment process, how you engage with parents, how you engage with students, how easy is it to process an enrollment and go through your system. The learning environment itself, so your curriculum, the way that you engage with students during the time they're with you, all of those things have to be considered. The graduation process and what's included in graduation, and how comfortable students feel as they're graduating and leaving your school. And then finally, even post-enrollment, what happens after they leave you that represents a successful experience? How do you track that information? How do you monitor it to ensure that it feeds back into your operational plan and strategy? Basically, it's a holistic approach. You know, quality assurance from a school standpoint has very often been primarily curricular in nature, but we believe that it really has to do with the entire learning experience, the entire experience of that student as they're engaging with the organization. The makeup of the quality assurance team is very important too. You have to have top-level executives involved because this group will form and come up with things that really set the direction of the organization. When it's done right and it's done well, you need to have a decision maker involved in that process. Otherwise, it's very difficult for the team to get anything done. The operations director, I'm involved. How things are done operationally affects the quality experience of a student and the parents. So, you know, we need to eliminate barriers to comfort for our students and our parents in every facet of the organization's engagement with them. Brian Scoggin, our curriculum director, obviously very, very important that we have high quality curriculum, but that works for students. So constantly evaluating that curriculum. And then Jackie Geip, our MTSS coordinator. How do we support students? How is that handled? And a constant evaluation of all of these areas. We have a process we go through. We identify a need, and that's driven by data. And you know, we use the term data driven. I would caution and be careful with that term. It's really more data informed. You can be data driven and head down the wrong direction, but if you're data informed, you're considering other aspects other than just data to make your decision. So then we design a study. We evaluate different options. We put together perhaps a pilot to test what we believe to be a solution to that problem. And the nice thing with our organization is we've got 24 different locations, so we can pick 1 or 2 that we want to run a pilot in and collect data on that pilot. And then we report the results and interpret the results and determine, which I didn't add here, but I need to, determine whether or not a change in direction is necessary for the organization. And many times that whole process happens within months. The quality assurance team is, because it involves all of these people, we're able to move quickly to identify a need from the need identification level all the way to the implementation process, because we've got the right people on the team. And keep in mind, this team is just the guiding group. We involve several other staff members in the organization while we're developing the solution. Always, teachers are involved. Whoever gets a representation from every facet of the organization that will be affected by that change is typically involved in the pilot process and the data interpretation process. So again, we use, for the data piece, we use a system, Edgenuity for our LMS and curricular side, and also engagement side. We feed that information into Pulse and evaluate quality, but there's a lot of other data that we use also outside of this, NWEA test results, for instance, when we dive into curricular needs. And external data. We even pull data in from competing districts or comparative districts, peer districts, so that we can see, what's happening outside of the organization and evaluate what we're doing. And we do that nationally if necessary as well. Then we use our weekly summary dashboards, and we may modify or add data to those dashboards as needed during a pilot so that we can track certain data effectively.
So when we talk about being data informed, we really look at 4 different types of data. We look at our current results, we look at where we want to be, and then we take a look at what are some supports that we can put in place to get us where we need to be, or what barriers are in the way that we need to remove. When you look at the whole student experience, it really does include all 4 of these pieces of data. The first of which, when it comes to, in my mind, the whole student experience, is our perception data. I know that's listed second on here, but the perception data is critical because, and we get that information from surveys. We currently survey staff, we survey students, and we survey our parents. Because at the end of the day, we need to know who our customer is, and we need to know what they value in order to meet their needs. So how are they feeling? What are the needs that they have? What do they value? Things that we may feel are going really well, when you get your survey data and it says something different, that causes you to take a pause and take a step back to really dive into, is this reality, or is this just a perceptual issue that is causing people to think differently? And you have to figure that out so that you can address it and move on. Another piece that we do is the achievement data. We have to look at, how are we doing to service our kids? What are our success rates? What's working well? What isn't working well? What are some things that we need to change in order to address the achievement issues? And that's where, like Chris just said, we will look at national data, and we will look at like schools and whatnot, so we can see how we are doing in comparison to them. And if they are doing better than we are, then we make the next step of, let's go visit them and find out what they're doing. You have to dive in. When it comes to demographics, it's important to know what your demographic makeup is initially, but it's also important to monitor that, because if your demographics change, then how you service them could potentially change. So you have to pay attention to that so we know if we're meeting our customer needs or not. And then finally, the process piece. When we look at how we operate, really there are two questions to ask. Are we supporting where we want to be, or are we creating barriers to where we want to be? So when you evaluate that, you need to decide that, and then you start to make decisions on what needs to change. So Chris mentioned some of the different pilots that we've done. And in our first speaker today, there were some comments that were made about, sometimes it takes 10 years to get there. And one of the comments was, we need to get better about, getting to where we want to be quicker. And these are just some examples of projects and pilots that we did just this year alone. And we're able to go through that process within a couple months, 2 to 3, maybe 4 month span of time, make decisions, and we are now entering into the school year, the 2021 school year, with these plans of actions because they were very effective in what we do. The very first one was our communications rubric, which was the presentation we did prior to this one, where we learned that how we communicate with kids directly impacts student engagement, which then will either positively or negatively affect the ending outcome of progress. So by doing that, we are going to be implementing that this year. We identified a need, good and bad practices, and are ready to roll that out so staff can start to self-evaluate and we can start to train. The second one, an after hours teaching model. We piloted that in 3 centers. One was rural and 2 were, one was urban and 2 were rural. One was in the lower peninsula, the others were in the upper peninsula, to really decide, when are the best times to provide after hours teaching. So going in, taking a look at the data, we were able to determine that our kids, there's a high percentage of them that are online working right around 7 p.m. And so we kind of went on either side of that, and we offered after hours teaching model. But what we did during that time was very specific, and we needed to make sure that our pilot implemented that with fidelity so we could determine, did it increase engagement? Did it make a difference at all, or did it decrease engagement? And what we found by following the model that we put in place, it drastically increased engagement. So therefore, we are going to roll that out with 10 of our centers this next year. Our summer school effectiveness. We've offered summer school for many, many, many years, but this year really was the first year that we collected specific data to determine the way that we're operating it. Is it necessary? Is it effective? Are there changes that need to be made? And after a 6-week program, we can honestly say that there definitely are things we will do differently moving into next year that will, 1, make us more effective, and 2, will drastically decrease the cost. So that will make Berrien Springs very, very happy. Another one, our student level dashboards. So you saw the dashboards that we keep. We can look at it as an organization. We can look at it as a lane. We can look at them by region, by center, and by staff member, but we are currently in the process of piloting our student level dashboards. We've been working with that since probably February, March, but we're not ready to roll that one out yet. That takes a little more time, so we will probably start to expand that in our pilot. Our 3 for 3 program, that was actually a regional pilot where that particular region focused on student engagement, login rates, and time on task, and really put some strategies in place to see if it made a difference. And we learned some things with that yes, student behavior, the time on task, is actually what we need to be focusing on. So we're changing student behavior in a positive way and showing them how they can do it. the coaching model. We had another region that was their pilot, and that was on coaching struggling staff. The goal when you coach struggling staff always is to see them improve and get better and become happier, as well as engage more students. In this particular situation, it actually opened our staff members' eyes to, maybe this isn't for me. And so he was able to make the personal choice to leave virtual education because he really is more of a face-to-face guy. But he left with pride. And we were very proud of how that whole process rolled out. Again, it was the data that showed us what we needed to do. Our student, parent, and staff surveys, we look at that information every time it comes in. We look to see if we've made progress, if we've gone backwards. These surveys really are about what people value and what is important to them. So many of our processes and procedures have been adjusted to take care of those issues that came up in the survey data. Our teacher mentor responsibility restructuring. By taking a look at that, we are actually able to become more intentional with how we support our kids based on what we want our teachers to do versus what we want our mentors to be doing. And by doing that, it actually will give our staff a little more breathing time, and then they're not doing double duty. Our school improvement planning, we put together a school improvement plan this year. We were able to involve every single staff member, which was up to almost 200 folks in the process. And I believe that we have commitment from that due to the process we did by focusing on what our data said, the pilots we've done, really tying it back to why are we here and what is our mission and vision. And we have a very rock solid school improvement plan for virtual learning, which is just incredible. So at the end of the day, our quality assurance team informs nearly every major decision made in the direction of our school, or to tell us what direction our school is going to go. So in closing, it's really important for any school district, whether you're brick and mortar or virtual or K-8, K-5, K-12, a quality assurance team really should be integrated into all learning. Because we live in the virtual world, it absolutely needs to be integrated into all virtual and remote learning, because you don't have that captive audience in front of you all of the time. So you have to be able to see what is happening right in front of you at any given time, because you don't have access to folks. By looking at the data, by having the right people on the right seats on the bus that are on your team, on your quality assurance team, you can ensure that you are tackling all of the important pieces, that you aren't leaving anything out, and that you can guide decisions for an organization, even though as large as ours, where we have 24 virtual learning sites from Marquette all the way down to Monroe, from Muskegon all the way to Port Huron, and sprinkled everywhere in there. You heard Dave say, or Mr. Eichberg say at the beginning, that Berrien Springs has actually created a second quality assurance team to monitor instruction for his on-campus and his current remote learning models that were used during the COVID-19. Questions from anyone?
I'm sorry if I'm asking you to repeat something, but can you go over who makes up the quality assurance team besides yourself and Chris?
Are we on?
Yep.
Okay. Yes. So for our virtual learning off-campus centers, our quality assurance team is made up of 4 individuals. I, being the executive director, because I'm pretty much, well, I'm the decision maker, and I'm that connection to Berrien Springs Public Schools. The second person that makes up that team is Chris Loisel. He is our operations director. It's very important to involve operations in order to improve the student experience, because your operations are kind of how you do business. The third person that makes up our team is Mr. Brian Scoggin. Now, we added Brian mid-year this year because we realized that we were kind of missing a piece, and Brian has a very critical role as our curriculum director.
That he was just added this year.
Yeah, well, that's true. He was just added this year. And so once we started to really dive into the curriculum pieces and the changes that we were making and needing to make for the student experience, we felt it was necessary to add Brian to our team. And so he's been able to address education quality. And then our fourth person is Jackie Geip. She is our MTSS coordinator. She is in there because we needed to involve her so she could address the staff and student engagement and the supports that were needed. She provides training. She does a lot of the piloting and the behind the scenes work for behavioral supports and academic supports, and she works with our interventionists. So she's very critical in terms of our tier 2 and 3s.
Every program, every need we identify people that are in the best position to inform us on a solution. So if it has to do with curriculum, teachers are involved. We have PLCs we work through to help us in that area and to inform us on needs. If it involves student support, we get folks that are in the trenches working with students involved on those committees. We basically set up separate committees to inform the group on direction and guidance, so we can also get buy-in in that process too. But yeah, absolutely, we never make decisions without incorporating the folks who actually have to play it out in the solution.
You know, what does it actually look like? So when your team gets together, how often do you get together? What are you doing when you get together? More of that like nuts and bolts of the team.
So the process that we go through is first evaluation of data, and all 4 of us are evaluating every week the data that's presented to us in the dashboards. That first and foremost informs us on need. But we're also communicating regularly with staff members. We have an admin team meeting every week. We actually have 2, and that information is also flowing into the quality assurance team. So when we identify an area where somebody on the admin team, and when I say admin team, I mean we have regional directors that manage the function of the centers, sort of like, I guess, pseudo superintendents of a group of schools. Those people are informing us on concerns or issues at the center level. We've got our regional office team, which is our administrative folks, and they're informing us on issues related to, you know, data flowing or processes, probably mostly process issues. And then we've got our executive leadership team, our curriculum group, our support team. All of those folks are involved in the administrative team. And so we're looking at data on a weekly basis. We're listening to our staff members in terms of their concerns and issues that they're seeing. And that informs the quality assurance team on what we need to focus on next to make sure that quality is at the level we expect. Once we identify a need, We will schedule meetings as frequently as necessary to work through that process. The need identification is already done, but then we design a study. We determine whether or not that need is a need that requires us to do something like develop a pilot or just further study data that we have available. So the team will meet not on any specific schedule really, but when we identify needs, and believe me, there's always needs in an organization. We have a list of needs that we constantly need to evaluate, and we have to be selective in terms of the outcome and the value of the outcome of that need. So that's the process. And then we report out the results, and then ultimately Christy and the executive team have to decide whether or not they want to implement what we recommend or suggest. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
You identified in the last session the communication that's effective for student achievement. Kind of the same thing, but for staff success. Have you identified any particulars that you work towards, that you have like a framework for?
Well, we've done a couple of things. You know how we talked about the panel discussions? And so we did a panel discussion with really highly successful staff around, you know, what is it that they're doing that is helping the engagement with their kids, and why they are so successful. And we videotaped it, we shared it, we invited people to come in. It was a kind of a question and answer session. But then we took it another step further around, we did it with our center directors, our top performing center directors, to talk about, you know, what are you doing that, you know, for culture and things like that. And so it was another panel discussion that then folks could ask questions on.
And from there, the beauty of those panel discussions is that you take your most experienced, highest performing staff members and let them speak to the other staff members doing those same jobs. And they learn quite a bit. But then we use data to determine whether or not there's improvement afterwards. And when there isn't, or when we believe there could still be more improvement, we add PD sessions that are tied directly to the areas of improvement that we've identified. And in fact, we're entering our PD sessions coming up next week, and they include teacher and mentor engagement and how to effectively use our systems. That's another area that we've identified as an area of need. Staff members are still a little uncomfortable with some of the things that we're doing or asking of them, and we need to make sure they're fully trained. So PD's informed based on our needs, and that's how we instruct and guide staff members through PD, and then through one-on-one training sessions that we perform as well with all of our staff as we look at the data.
How do you determine the metric? I don't know if metric's the right word. How do you determine the quality? I mean, you're trying to measure the quality. Like, so where do you set the bar, or how do you set that bar for each of the things that you want to be measuring?
That's a great question. So every year we have a set of benchmarks. So we for every data point that we track, and the beauty is that's all tracked automatically, so we don't have to do a whole bunch of manual tracking. It's tracked automatically. For each one of the benchmarks, the data points that we've identified as a critical point in order to evaluate whether or not we're performing at the level we expect, we have benchmarks, and we have color coding for those benchmarks. One meaning needs improvement, and that's a red, where it's bad. Yellow is approaching top performing, and then green is top performing. and every staff member gets their dashboard that's color-coded to match the benchmarks that, by the way, all staff members get a chance to give us feedback on what would be reasonable to expect on those benchmarked data points first before we roll them out. And in fact, we just went through that process and got feedback from all the staff. We took a look at our benchmarks. We took a look at last year's data. We tweaked a few of those benchmark codes, and we just sent that out last week for all staff to review to make sure they were good for this year.
We've even taken it one step further, where we are training our regional directors on, they all have access to the dashboard and they know how to use the dashboard, but to be an additional support, we are providing them professional development on what does leadership look like with, within your region, with your staff. What does that look like? What for you to move them to move them forward?
How can you best support your staff in the positions that you're in? And we found last year, as we went through training with staff out of the quality assurance process, that was a need. Mm-hmm. And now it's incorporated into our management practices going forward this year.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's primarily voluntary. Many of the needs that are identified by those teachers and mentors that work for us. And then all of a sudden, the beauty of our organization is we love to innovate, and we love new ideas, and we love to test those ideas to attempt to improve the whole organization. Those ideas a lot of times come from staff, mm-hmm. and they're the ones who want to own the implementation of the study. And it's not very hard for us to get people involved in that process because they want to make improvements too.
Even one of the pilots was running with PLCs. We didn't even get that started. That actually was going to be a summer project pre-COVID. But then when all of this happened, Brian Scoggin, our curriculum director, got it going. And it was not a mandate, but we had almost 100% of our staff that attended. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a mandate. No. And so that actually then became a conversation about, well, do PLCs become a non-negotiable this next year? And where we ultimately landed was no. It's right now it's optional, and because we have people that want to be there already, and if they don't want to be there, then probably we're doing something wrong. And so we chose not to make it be a mandate, that we're just going to continue to encourage, and we're going to make it good stuff so people will want to be there. Because sometimes when you say you have to, then they don't want to.
And then when you do a pilot, because when you were talking about all those, all the BOLSA had the programs, and a lot of them are pilots. So if they pilot in one campus, then is that, and let's say it's successful, they share that out with the other campuses then to see if it would meet in, because not every pilot is going to work in every campus because of their, the students that are involved, or the staff that you have.
Right. And, following the initial pilot, we then have conversations around, do we need to expand it to see, will we get the same results maybe under a different situation? And like our after hours teaching model, that actually started just in one urban center. And then we were getting some results. And the more we got talking about it, we thought, well, maybe we need to pilot it in a rural center to see if we can get the same results, or would they be different? And so we went from what was going to be a 2-month pilot to a 3-month pilot, but then we ended up adding a couple of rural centers to see.
Just curious, what was the result?
And yeah, it was positive.
It was positive.
Yeah. Okay, so back to the results of the after hours detail. If you ever pull, from a virtual standpoint, if you ever pull engagement data from your LMS, you'll see Students are online quite a bit between the time you're going to close your school, which is 4 o'clock or so, all the way up until about 11 o'clock. And that's time that they're not getting any support. And that's a problem, because that's when they're working, and you can't force them to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning when they're in a virtual program sometimes, right? Unless you're doing direct instruction. You've got to be where they're at when they're there in order to support them. So that was driven by that data, but then when we went ahead and put teachers in that time frame and connected them with students, we found that students were much more productive. So it was very, very successful. And so we're doing balanced calendars for our centers. We're considering, after hours coverage, all because of what we found in that. And
you probably find that there's teachers who want that type of schedule too. Not every teacher wants that, but there are going to be some teachers who would prefer to have a schedule that's later in the day.
That's right. A flexible schedule. And if our students need it and they're going to thrive with it, then as an organization, we've got to consider it.
Would anybody else like to ask any questions? Okay. All right. I think everybody's ready to eat. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to go ahead and